The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the pristine sidewalks of Willowcrest, a gated community just outside of Atlanta, Georgia. Every house in this neighborhood looked like it belonged in a magazine. Brick facades, oversized porches, and driveways lined with freshly mulched flower beds. The lawns, trimmed to perfection, stretched out like an endless sea of emerald green. It was the kind of place where nothing ever seemed out of place, until now. 15-year-old Marcus Reed walked along the pavement, his gym bag slung over one shoulder, the faint rhythm of a hip-hop track humming through his earbuds. He had just left basketball practice at Lincoln High, his muscles aching from sprints, his jersey still damp with sweat. The shortcut through Willowcrest shaved nearly half an hour off his usual route home. It was a path he had taken before, but tonight, something felt different. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. Behind one of the towering bay windows of a two-story colonial, Eleanor Whitmore sat in her antique armchair, fingers curled around a steaming cup of chamomile tea. She was a woman of habit, always watching the street as the sun set, ensuring her neighborhood remained as perfect as it was meant to be. And tonight, something felt wrong. A boy, alone, walking through Willowcrest. She leaned forward, her heart rate quickening. The way he glanced around, the way his pace seemed cautious. Was he scoping out houses? Her fingers hovered over her phone, a hesitation. Then, with a deep breath, she made the call. 911, what's your emergency? There's someone suspicious in the neighborhood. And just like that, the night took a turn. Marcus kept walking, his footsteps steady against the smooth concrete. The beat of his music should have drowned out the world, but something in the air felt off. He could sense it, the weight of unseen eyes pressing against his back, the stillness of the houses around him. He wasn't sure why, but his gut told him something wasn't right. Then he heard it, a siren, not loud, not blaring, just a single, clipped wail that sent a chill down his spine. The kind that made his pulse jump before his brain could even process why. Marcus slowed, his fingers tightening around the strap of his bag. Up ahead, blue and red lights flickered against the perfect white fences of Willowcrest. A patrol car pulled up to the curb. The doors opened. 2 officers stepped out. Officer Daniels, broad-shouldered, mid-40s, with the stiff posture of a man who had done this 100 times before. Behind him, Officer Carter, younger, hesitant, his hands twitching at his belt. "Stop right there," Daniels ordered. Marcus froze, his breath hitching. He wasn't sure what to do. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He was just walking home. Still, he forced himself to stay still, to keep his hands visible, just like his mom had taught him. "Where you headed?" Daniels asked, his tone flat, almost rehearsed. Marcus swallowed hard. "Home, just leaving practice." Daniels glanced at his bag. "You got ID?" Marcus hesitated. It was in his pocket. But reaching for it, was that a mistake? His pulse pounded in his ears. The lights flashed. The street was silent. And for the first time, Marcus wondered, was he going to make it home tonight? The air felt thick, like the whole world was holding its breath. Marcus could feel his heartbeat hammering in his chest, but he kept his face still. "Stay calm, stay quiet, don't make any sudden moves." His mother's voice echoed in his head, a lesson she had drilled into him since he was old enough to understand what it meant to be a young black man in America. Officer Daniels took a step closer, his hand hovering near his belt. The question wasn't spoken, but Marcus could feel it in the air. Was he a threat? Did he belong here? Then, like a scene straight out of a movie, the sound of screeching tires split the silence. A sleek black SUV swung around the corner, rolling to a stop just feet away. The door flung open, and out stepped a woman in a sharp navy blue blazer and designer heels that clicked against the pavement like a metronome of authority. Danielle Reed. Marcus let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. His mother had arrived, and she wasn't playing. She didn't rush. She didn't shout. She simply walked slow, deliberate, her piercing gaze locking onto the 2 officers like a heat-seeking missile. Danielle stiffened. Carter took a half step back. They didn't know who she was yet, but something in the way she carried herself made it clear this wasn't just another civilian. "My son is trying to get home," Danielle said, her voice smooth as glass, but sharp as a blade. "Is there a reason you're stopping him?" Danielle's hesitated, just for a second, but it was long enough. She smiled. The kind of smile that said, "You have no idea who you're dealing with." And just like that, the balance of power shifted. Officer Daniel squared his shoulders, trying to hold on to whatever authority he had left. But it was slipping fast. The second this woman stepped onto the scene, the energy shifted. "Ma'am," he started, clearing his throat. "We received a call about a suspicious individual in the neighborhood. We were just doing our job." Danielle tilted her head slightly, like a cat studying a mouse right before pouncing. Suspicious how she took another step forward, her heels clicking like a countdown clock. "Tell me, officer, what exactly made my son suspicious?" Daniels hesitated. He glanced at Carter, but the younger officer looked like he'd rather be anywhere but here. He was looking around, Daniels said finally, voice a little less sure, like he was scouting the area. Danielle actually laughed. Not a loud laugh, not even an amused one, just a soft, knowing chuckle. Looking around, she repeated, nodding. "You mean?" Like any human being would while walking down the street, Daniels clenched his jaw. "We have a responsibility to investigate any call that comes in." Danielle's expression didn't change. "Oh, I completely agree," she said smoothly. "So tell me, when was the last time you stopped a white teenager for walking home through this neighborhood?" Silence. Carter shifted awkwardly. Daniels exhaled through his nose, looking more frustrated than confident now. "You see," Danielle continued, crossing her arms, "the real threat here isn't my son. It's the assumption that a black boy in a nice neighborhood must be up to no good." From the nearby house, Eleanor Whitmore peeked out from behind her curtain, heart pounding. She had watched the entire exchange, and for the first time, she wondered had she made a terrible mistake. Danielle turned, locking eyes with her. And for Eleanor, it felt like Judgment Day. For a moment, the world stood still. The flashing red and blue lights painted the pristine white fences of Willowcrest in sharp, shifting colors. Inside her house, Eleanor Whitmore clutched her phone, her fingers trembling slightly. Danielle didn't break eye contact. She didn't have to. The weight of the moment did all the work. Eleanor swallowed hard. She had always considered herself a good person, a responsible member of the community. She paid her HOA fees on time, donated to local charities, even smiled politely at the black family that lived 3 blocks over. But now, standing at her window, watching this confrontation unfold, she felt something she hadn't expected: shame. Danielle finally turned back to the officers, her expression unreadable. "I'll ask one last time," she said, her voice carrying that razor-sharp edge. "Why did you stop my son?" Daniels, who had held his ground so firmly just moments ago, suddenly looked like he was searching for an exit. He cleared his throat. "We were responding to a call. A resident was concerned." Danielle arched a brow, concerned about what? She held up a hand before he could answer. "No, let me guess. A black teenager walking through her neighborhood at sunset was just too much to handle." Carter shifted uncomfortably. Danielle's jaw clenched. "Look, ma'am, we're not saying." "But you did," Danielle interrupted smoothly. "You pulled up, lights flashing, hands on your belts. Like my son was some kind of criminal." Daniels opened his mouth but shut it again, because what could he say? The truth was written all over the scene. Marcus, still gripping the strap of his bag, glanced between his mom and the officers. He knew she had won this battle, but why did it feel like there would always be another one waiting? Officer Daniels exhaled sharply, his grip tightening around his belt, not in threat, but in frustration. He had been on the force for years, handled plenty of these situations, but this one was different. This woman wasn't afraid. She wasn't backing down. And worse, she was making him question himself. Carter, still standing slightly behind him, looked like he wanted to melt into the pavement. He had seen enough videos, enough news stories, to know how these things could go sideways. And right now, it felt like they were teetering on the edge. Danielle crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. "So, tell me, officer," she said, tilting her head slightly. "Is it standard protocol to detain kids for walking home?" Daniels clenched his jaw. "We were just following up on a report, ma'am." Danielle took a step forward, her presence towering even without raising her voice. "Right, and I'm sure that report was very detailed," she said dryly. "Did the caller say he had a weapon? Was he breaking into cars, or was he just existing?" Silence. Daniel's eyes flicked toward Eleanor's house, where the curtains had been drawn back just an inch enough for him to see the shadow of the woman who had made the call. Danielle smirked. "Let me help you out," she said. "The only thing my son is guilty of is walking while black in a neighborhood where people like you assume he doesn't belong." Carter exhaled, the tension thick enough to cut. Daniels, for the first time, looked uncertain. Danielle wasn't done. "Now, I suggest you wrap up your little investigation, because I'd hate to have to call your superiors and explain why two officers are harassing my son over nothing." Daniels stiffened, but he knew he was outmatched. And just like that, the power they had walked in with, gone. Daniels inhaled through his nose, trying to keep his composure. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the silent judgment in Danielle's stare, the barely concealed discomfort in Carter's shifting stance. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. "Look," he started, voice tight, "we're not trying to escalate anything here." Danielle let out a slow, unimpressed breath. "Oh, you're not?" she said, raising a brow. "Well, forgive me if the flashing lights, aggressive approach, and hand hovering over your gun gave me a slightly different impression." Marcus bit the inside of his cheek to keep from smirking. His mom was in full control now. Danielle straightened, but whatever authority he had walked in with had already crumbled. He glanced at Carter, searching for backup, but the younger officer looked like he was counting the minutes until he could be anywhere but here. "You have no reason to detain my son," Danielle continued, her tone smooth, but edged with steel. "So unless you're planning on arresting him for carrying a gym bag and existing in the wrong zip code, I suggest you let him go." Daniels hesitated. His pride screamed at him to push back, but logic told him he was cornered. And then, like a final blow, Danielle pulled out her badge. FBI. Daniels barely held back a grimace. Carter's eyebrows shot up so fast they nearly left his face. "You're an agent," Carter blurted out before he could stop himself. Danielle smiled. "That a problem?" Silence. Daniels swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. "No, ma'am," he muttered. Danielle took a step closer, lowering her voice just enough to twist the knife. "Then do your job correctly. Or find another one." Daniels exhaled sharply. "You're free to go." Marcus didn't move right away. He wanted to make sure this wasn't some kind of trick. Danielle turned to him, a look passing between them, one that said, "We're not done talking about this." But for now, it was over, and as the officers turned back toward their car, Marcus wondered would they remember this moment, or would they just try to forget. The drive home was quiet, too quiet. Marcus sat in the passenger seat of the black SUV, staring out the window as the streetlights flickered past. His fingers traced the strap of his gym bag, the weight of the night pressing against his chest. His mother hadn't said much since they left Willowcrest, but he could feel it, the energy radiating off her, sharp and unshakable. Finally, she spoke. "You okay?" Marcus let out a slow breath. "I don't know." Danielle glanced at him, her jaw tight. She wanted to tell him he was safe, that everything was fine now. But they both knew that wasn't true. "Mom." Marcus hesitated, fingers tightening into fists. "What if you hadn't gotten there in time?" That question hung in the air like a storm cloud. Danielle gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. She had faced criminals, liars, people who would do anything to escape justice. But nothing terrified her more than the thought of not being there for her son when he needed her most. She exhaled, steadying herself. "That's why you have to know how to protect yourself, Marcus." He turned to her, frustration flickering in his eyes. "But I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just walking home." Danielle nodded, her heart aching at the truth he was just beginning to understand. "I know," she said softly, "but the world doesn't always see you the way I do." Marcus looked down, his mind racing. "It's not fair," he mumbled. Danielle sighed. "No, it's not," she admitted. "But until things change, we have to be ready." She reached over, resting a hand on his shoulder. "You're smart, you're strong, but most of all, you're aware now." Marcus swallowed hard. He had always known, in the back of his mind, that this kind of thing happened. But tonight, it wasn't a story on the news. It wasn't a viral video, it was him. And now, there was no going back. The SUV pulled into the driveway, the hum of the engine fading into the stillness of the night. Marcus sat there for a moment, gripping the door handle but not moving. His mother didn't rush him, she just watched, waiting. Finally, he spoke. "Will it ever change?" Danielle sighed, resting her hands on the steering wheel. "I want to tell you yes," she said softly. "I want to tell you that one day, you won't have to think about this. That you'll be able to walk anywhere, anytime, without worrying about how someone might see you." Marcus turned to her, searching her face for something: hope, reassurance, anything to hold on to. "But I can't promise that," she admitted, her voice steady but heavy. "What I can promise is that you'll always be prepared. That you'll always know how to carry yourself, how to protect yourself." Marcus exhaled, his head falling back against the seat. "I hate that I have to think about this." Danielle reached over, gripping his hand. "I know, baby," she said gently. "But listen to me, there's power in knowing, in understanding how the world sees you, even when it's unfair. Because that's how you learn to move through it without letting it break you." Marcus nodded slowly, his mind still replaying the night's events. The flashing lights, the officer's stares, the way Eleanor had looked at him through her window, not with curiosity, but with fear. He wondered if she was still thinking about what happened. If she would ever understand the weight of what she had done. Danielle squeezed his hand. "We may not be able to change the past," she said, her voice strong, "but we can choose how we act in the future." Marcus swallowed hard, then nodded. He didn't have all the answers. But tonight, he understood something he never had before. And now he had a choice: to live in fear, or to walk forward knowing exactly who he was.